Story 1. Then the economy breaks down, as in the hyperinflation in Zimbabwe. Scarcity and alternative methods of payment arise. Story 2. Then you'll have a front row seat to what, in economics, is referred to as the Thunderdome. Story 3. Germany experienced this too in the late 1920s and early 1930s. People paid for goods with carts of banknotes. Postage stamps had extra numbers printed on top because the stamp printers could not keep up. Story 4. I am going to let my adult children live with me as long as they want so they can save as much money as possible. We do not have silver spoons in this house, but we do have a roof and heating and air conditioning. Story 5. Lifestyle changes are happening. Young people are already less likely to own cars or homes. Many may cut back on luxuries and choose cheaper food. Politically, voters often turn to more radical parties, or established parties change their policies dramatically. Story 6. Look at history. See the hyperinflation of 1920s Germany. Germans, under the Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I, were forced to pay huge reparations to reimburse the Allies for the cost of the war. The German government's solution was to devalue the currency by printing vast amounts of money quickly, which made the currency worthless. Inside Germany, factories posted that day's wages at their doors and paid employees twice a day, at lunch and at the end of the shift, so workers could run out and buy goods during lunch since that morning's pay could be worth less by the end of the day. Sometimes factories had to adjust pay for the second half of the day to get employees to return. At the start of 1922, a loaf of bread cost 160 marks. By the end of 1923, a loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. There were stories of people running down the street with baskets and wheelbarrows of money trying to buy anything as quickly as they could before stores closed so they did not have to hold on to cash. As a result, trying to save money was futile. Banks collapsed. Without banking, there was no lending to grow the economy. By the 1930s, the economy had collapsed and they experienced rampant deflation. Nobody had jobs or a way to buy food. This set the stage for Hitler's rise to power. Story 7. The average consumer will begin going without. Soon it will be entertainment expenses, then groceries. After that, people will stop paying their credit card and loan bills. Finally, they will stop paying their utility bills and mortgages and will move into shared housing or live in their cars if they have one. Story 8. The problem is that the rich are doing so well that they account for an increasing share of consumer spending. From a policy perspective, the government is less concerned if you are now poor. Story 9. I am a retiree. Homeowners insurance and my car insurance have skyrocketed this year. Medicare premiums will be rising because President Trump's big ugly bill will trigger cuts of $500 million to the program. Prescription drug costs keep rising, and food prices are also increasing. I can no longer afford vacations. Every year, the modest rise in Social Security benefits is immediately offset by the increased Medicare premium. I am very fortunate to have a small pension and some savings. Others have it worse, but it is bad enough. Story 10. Survival foods are historically a thing for a reason. Pot-au-feu, rice and beans, congee, matzah, and soda bread. I would start preparing now and learn to cook for lean times. When the farm economy collapses and corn and soybeans rot in the fields because of a trade war with a major buyer, food will become much more expensive. Prices for non-essentials such as internet service and gasoline may fall because people cannot afford them, and companies will have to try to win back customers. Story 11. In the United States, because it is such a huge part of the world economy, I don't think hyperinflation will result. Stagflation is likely the worst-case scenario, which would lower living standards for the middle class and the poor. This could lead to riots and civil unrest, but modern policing is efficient, and I do not know what riots and civil unrest look like anymore. Most likely, once consumers stop buying, manufacturers and businesses will try to innovate to lower prices through improved process efficiency. Some will fail and some will succeed, and the world will keep spinning. The end result will be a difficult time for wage earners except for those in the highest percentiles. Story 12. Read German history immediately before World War II and you will get your answer. Story 13. Historically, that was usually when the guillotine was brought out. Story 14. Other economic factors, such as rising unemployment, can slow the economy. The end result may be a recession, which is slow economic growth, or a depression, which is a prolonged contraction. With high inflation, some consumers cannot keep up. Discretionary spending slows, financial decisions are delayed, and savings dwindle. There is a fourth scenario beyond inflation, recession, and depression that the United States has not seen since the late 1970s. It ultimately helped President Reagan appear effective and started the trickle-down era that Republicans have relied on too heavily, contributing to current problems. That scenario is called stagflation, where the economy is stagnant while inflation continues. Things become severe during stagflation, and certain tariffs and other policy decisions risk pushing us toward it. Everyone suffers in stagflation except the very wealthy, who often find ways to get richer. Not a political post. I describe myself as a Republican in name only and am definitely not a supporter of Trump. Even without Trump, I see the economic faults of my own party's policies. I am generally fiscally conservative. Story 15. Eventually, it would cause civil unrest. If people are in a position with absolutely nothing to lose, that is, no food or shelter, they will push back. Story 16. The Federal Reserve will crash the economy before it lets inflation get out of control. In 1979, Paul Volcker raised interest rates to 20% to snuff out the rampant stagflation of the 1970s. Story 17. People will probably begin bartering or selling their belongings to survive. Story 18. Corporate price gouging has caused, and will continue to cause, the average consumer difficulty keeping up. Corporations blame inflation and capitalize on the fact that most of the public, and some foreign participants, have no idea how inflation and fiat currency work. The sort of runaway inflation the economically illiterate worry about does not happen in developed economies because central banking authorities can and do create and destroy liquidity at will. The value of their currencies is not based on physical cash supply or a commodity like gold, and it has not been for decades. Inflation is targeted at around 2% to keep the economy stable. Why positive, you may ask? To prevent deflation, which can damage an economy faster than moderate inflation. Circling back to the start, the real reason consumers cannot keep up is corporate greed. A corporate fast food burger is not $10 because its component ingredients are worth that much, or because of inflation or labor costs or taxation, or any of the things large corporations complain about. It is companies raising prices arbitrarily as far as they can, and consumers still pay, which legitimizes the practice. At the same time, wage growth has been relatively flat compared to the cost of living, and all for the same reason: corporate greed. Companies will charge as much as they can while paying their employees as little as possible. Story 19. Already here. Welcome to a developed country that is discovering poverty and begging a corrupt government for help. Fun times ahead. Story 20. Hyperinflation causes savings to vanish, prices to soar, shortages to occur, the economy to collapse, and unrest to grow. Story 21. The economy begins to break down. People cannot afford goods and services, and savings and debts lose value rapidly. What happens next depends on the broader context. Is there civil unrest? How are banks and the government responding? Are they able to implement fiscal policy? Hyperinflation does not occur in a vacuum. There are causes. Most often, it results from governments needing money and excessively printing currency. Story 22. Do not worry. Companies will use artificial intelligence to create automated shoppers who will buy things online, so people will not need to be involved. It will be much more efficient. Story 23. The rich hope it means the poor will die out so they do not have to worry about them. A more likely scenario is civil war. Story 24. It is only after you have lost everything that you are free to do anything. Story 25. If you are talking about our current situation, the answer is to look at the late 1970s. We can see what happened then. It was significantly worse. People changed their behavior and there is a lag. People drove less and demanded more fuel-efficient cars. They bought Japanese imports, and United States automakers were slow to respond, seeking bailouts and import restrictions before eventually producing more fuel-efficient cars. I think we will see this with food. I have not eaten beef in 6 months. Eventually, inflation will decline. Story 26. I can't open links or browse the web. Paste the text you want processed here, or tell me if you want me to use and process the Wikipedia article about the Zimbabwean $100 trillion note. I will rely on my training data and produce a cleaned version. Also confirm how you want acronyms handled. Expand on first use only or replace every occurrence with the full phrase. Story 27. The government will print $100 notes and hand-deliver bundles of them to every household in the country on a velvet cushion, accompanied by a trumpet fanfare. There will be no downside to this. Story 28. It already happened to me. I have about 8 months until I have to give up my apartment. I didn't do anything drastically different. I went from breaking even to spending about $300 more per month than I earn. Story 29. They were called food riots, and they were so violent that France no longer has a king. Story 30. According to a textbook, when demand decreases, the price falls. So far, we continue to buy. Story 31. Trump will bring back debtors' prisons and make you work for 50 cents an hour while others make $8 an hour off your labor. Welcome to China. Story 32. They will pull the rug out from under us as soon as they finish overthrowing all the countries the Zionists want. Story 33. For the United States, the road to get there is more interesting than the destination. Before the system breaks, wealthier Americans who cannot afford groceries can still survive on credit for a while. The whole system opposes homelessness among wealthy people. Story 34. If that happens, people will stop buying goods and prices will have to fall for sellers to make a sale. It is self-correcting. Story 35. They will leave and go elsewhere. Detroit is a good example. Crime will push people away. A new government will rise, and the cycle will continue. Story 36. Ask an Argentine. They have had issues for 40 years with hyperinflation. There is little hope that middle-class people will do well in this situation. Story 37. Savings and investments can be wiped out when held in a worthless currency. That is why it is so important that we remain the world's reserve currency. The current administration appears to be accelerating a hyperdevaluation of the United States dollar. Characteristics similar to the Great Depression could return if we do not take this seriously. Story 38. Several consequences can occur. If inflation outpaces wages for too long, people stop buying goods and some begin stealing to survive. More people must rely on welfare, social security programs, and other assistance. Companies reduce staff because consumers buy less. For details, see the 2017 Threat Index from the World Economic Forum. It explains why countries and companies must keep people at the forefront of their agenda. Story 39. Argentina, Turkey, and the Soviet Union are examples. Most people's spending in the United States is discretionary. Dining out, processed foods, multiple vehicles such as motorcycles, boats, all-terrain vehicles, snowmobiles, and airplanes, as well as excess clothing and imported foods. When a crisis hits, purchases stop. You wear your clothes and shoes until they wear out. Diets become based largely on grains, beans, and legumes. The wealthy will still do fine, while wage earners and those on pensions will end up scraping by. Story 40. A lot of things have continued to function because people have not yet reached a breaking point. They still have something to lose, or at least believe they do. We are beginning to see more cases where individuals, whether out of legitimate desperation, mental illness, or belief in conspiracy theories, reach the point where they truly believe the personal consequences of active participation in radical or revolutionary activity are not significantly worse than the personal consequences of inaction. This can range from lone extremists committing mass shootings or assassination attempts to people covertly or openly participating in anti-government activities, from protests to espionage. If society reaches the point where the majority believes they cannot endure their circumstances and truly have nothing left to risk by rebelling, where their lives are so desperate that death is not feared, then order breaks down. We may see full-scale riots, open civil war, and balkanization of formerly stable nations. For now, we still have creature comforts, we still believe in the social contract, and we still worry that our actions may bring harm to those we care about. If those comforts become unattainable, if reciprocity in the social contract can no longer be assumed, or if punishment becomes so arbitrary that loved ones face danger regardless of our actions, the scales will tip. Story 41. Then people will starve, be unable to afford necessities, live in large shared houses, and experience worse health. Story 42. Inflation in the United States is relatively low. It had been under 3% for over a year before the 2024 election. Although it has risen in recent months, it remains fairly low, above the ideal level of 2%. Story 43. Once again, we have a literal blueprint for this. The Great Depression became so severe because an inflationary period was exacerbated by the implementation of the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. We ended up with breadlines. However, this administration obviously would not help with bread distribution, so you will be on your own. Story 44. Stagflation is probably where we are headed. The last time this was a prominent condition, World War II occurred. Story 45. Society becomes uncomfortable very quickly. People stop buying anything except food and shelter, businesses collapse, and governments panic, either printing more money and making things worse or raising interest rates so high that no one can borrow. History shows it usually ends with either major government intervention or people in the streets. Story 46. They will die in the streets if the private prison labor exploitation system has no use for them. Story 47. Cuba has assigned shopping days for specific goods. There are long lines, and when you reach the front, there may be nothing left. There are frequent power outages. People walk down the middle of the street to avoid the risk of crumbling architecture falling on their heads. It is heartbreaking because the architecture was once stunningly beautiful. Story 48. If inflation is not matched by a corresponding increase in wages, the result is immiseration and poverty. Goods will be produced but not sold in domestic markets, creating another of the recurring economic crises that occur roughly every decade. Simultaneous oversupply and consumers' inability to buy goods have characterized most crises over the past 200 years. Either governments and markets make adjustments, such as exporting to foreign markets, increasing wages and welfare, or lowering prices by outsourcing labor. Otherwise, conditions deteriorate until the state can no longer function. Story 49. The average American receives some free green toilet paper to use. Story 50. You will probably see different currencies being used. For example, in Venezuela, the United States dollar is used. Story 51. If wages increase accordingly, the net effect is that people's retirement and savings shrink, and more older people have to return to work. It will discourage saving and encourage spending their paychecks now. Story 52. If the government loses control of inflation, prices can rise so quickly that you receive your salary and immediately rush to the store to avoid having earned too little to buy a meal. Story 53. The top 20% of earners drive the economy of the United States. There are no real issues until that group starts to pull back. Story 54. This is what I do not understand. I understand that the Republican Party wants to give the top 1% anything they want, to grift and to cheat, but how does a country made up of poor people help that 1% when they do not have the dollars to buy their products? I also understand that none of these politicians actually wants to help anyone but themselves, and this short-term thinking will not help them in the long run. Story 55. The economy collapses as in the Weimar Republic, and fascism then uses it as an excuse to single out a group and make them the scapegoat for everything that has gone wrong. Story 56. Governments may decide to rebalance their currency. For example, Iran's parliament will redenominate the rial by a factor of 10,000. Story 57. People begin to die as the distribution of goods scales up. Story 58. Pay with potatoes or whatever you have. Story 59. There will be a huge transfer of wealth. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies will become the new currency. I can't believe no one else is talking about it. Story 60. The first thing a person needs is a trade, such as sewing, tailoring, pottery, or cooking, so they are a valuable person. When money has no value, people must barter for what they need. Story 61. Where the hell have you been? The average consumer is screwed and has been for a long time. Story 62. Do not worry, because Donald Trump will say that inflation is actually down. Problem solved. Story 63. Mass unemployment, starvation, and catastrophic homelessness. Story 64. Crime increases. When average consumers cannot afford goods, people react out of desperation and may turn to crime. Story 65. The banks get to foreclose on many homes and garnish many wages. It will be a money printer for the rich. The poor will be ground to dust after they are bled dry of all the money they have. Story 66. We were talking about our grocery budget the other night. For a family of 5 in the San Francisco Bay Area, it had been $1,500 per month for years. Then that ballooned to $2,000 to $2,500 per month during coronavirus disease 2019 and is now around $3,200 to $3,500 per month. My mother-in-law lives with us and asked what people will do who cannot absorb the increases. They will shop at discount grocery stores, cut back on meats, alcohol, and other high-ticket items, and move closer to beans and rice. We do not even buy red meat or alcohol anymore. Story 67. In the past, you could count on the government implementing reasonable economic policies such as adjusting interest rates, offering tax breaks for the middle class, and targeted spending on new technologies to spur growth. But with this United States administration, which is vindictive and greedy, the worst is yet to come. Try to reduce your debt by avoiding large purchases and paying off your loans. Story 68. We will likely find out in a relatively short amount of time. Story 69. The bots that will replace us do not need to buy as many things. Story 70. It has already happened. Do you have children who are struggling to buy a house? Did you know that 2 generations ago you could buy a nice house on one income? Have you seen the price of a new car recently? The price has risen dramatically. Why is this happening? As billionaires get richer, they increase their wealth by buying and investing in assets that retain value. Land, housing, banks, gold, art, Bitcoin, and government debt. The more they buy, the less there is for everyone else to own, so prices rise. Billionaires benefit from inflation because the value of their assets goes up. If others cannot afford to buy assets, billionaires are less affected. The government cannot bail people out because it is in debt as well. Story 71. Read a bit of history. This has happened to nearly every fiat currency. It is ugly. Story 72. Ordinary inflation is self-correcting. Prices rise until people stop buying or new competitors enter the now lucrative market, which forces vendors to lower prices. Hyperinflation is a monetary problem. The developed world has not seen it for 95 years because policymakers know to avoid the actions that cause it. The multi-year push toward ordinary inflation and the few months of central bank overreaction to coronavirus disease 2019 were a very sobering reminder. Story 73. I couldn't find Reese's Oreos in town today. I think it's already coming. Story 74. We hunt the rich or we die. The world's economy has been broken for so long that economic collapse is normal, and only the poor experience it. Remember the 2008 collapse when the elite were toasting champagne to our plight? It did not apply to them. We are on our own. Story 75. The end of the petrodollar is here. With the advent of artificial intelligence and Palantir, they will implement a digital identity system and issue universal basic income on a blockchain platform using stablecoins. The United States government has said it will pay debts with cryptocurrency. Invest in the infrastructure. Story 76. Social services for the poor offer next to nothing these days. Food stamps if you can get them, but that is about it. The Civil War in the United States saw bread riots when angry, hungry women forced the rich to give them food. I think we are going to see a lot more store theft, where regular people walk into supermarkets and take what they need and run out. I have sat around and tried to brainstorm a crime where I will not get caught. I am a near elderly white woman who melts into the woodwork. No one even notices me in establishments. Or I could be a getaway driver. I have no compunction about ripping off a major corporation, but I would leave individual citizens alone. I just need a plan. I cannot even be a Walmart greeter at this juncture. Story 77. Don't worry. It's as simple as lowering interest rates and printing more money. Story 78. When consumers can no longer afford to consume, everything fails. That is why policymakers print money, provide loans and welfare, and lower interest rates to postpone the problem. This wealth ultimately flows back to corporations and the political elite. When the music finally stops, it will be catastrophic and beyond our comprehension. Story 79. This is where economic theory comes into play. A depression is said to occur every 100 years. We are near that 100-year mark when average Americans can afford more. Story 80. An increasing number of people are becoming homeless and dying of starvation. Story 81. Luxuries will be the first casualty. Then people will sell what they can. When they cannot do that, some people will steal. When there is a crackdown on theft, people will turn to violence. Society is always 9 missed meals away from anarchy. Story 82. When buying slows, manufacturers lower prices. If prices do not match incomes, cuts are made to restore balance. Automatic adjustments occur when the market is stressed. Story 83. I think we are in a different era. The top 10% are driving the market. Poor people are going to remain poor and the rich are going to get richer. America has never been in this scenario. I think the standard of living will continue to drop for the middle and lower classes. Late-stage capitalism. We are all screwed unless you make more than $350,000, in which case you are just a working stiff trying to have the cool things adults had in the 90s. Story 84. Plot twist. We're already there. I budget with the same intensity people use to plan heists. Story 85. Brazil's Plano Real, introduced in 1994, ended hyperinflation largely by restoring public confidence in the currency's stability. The government introduced a new currency initially pegged to the United States dollar, imposed strict fiscal rules, and controlled the money supply, creating confidence that prices would not spiral. It worked. Story 86. Corporations introduce indentured servitude, and the fascist plan moves one step further. Story 87. A good example is Argentina. Read about what happened there before Milei showed up. Story 88. The average consumer reaches a point where they are no longer average. Story 89. We will all become poorer. It appears the intent is to create 2 classes, the very rich and the have-nots. There will be a significant decline in the standard of living. Many people will suffer and some may perish. Story 90. There will be some form of revolution and an immediate cancellation of all United States debt. Hopefully, laws will then be enacted to forbid creating unbalanced budgets. This would end the large military, the welfare state, and corporate welfare. To bring corporations in line, remember that the states have the authority to disincorporate them or strip them of their rights. Story 91. If Trump somehow gains control of the Federal Reserve Board, we will probably find out. Story 92. When money loses meaning, people trade trust instead. Barter, favors, and power become the real currency. Inflation doesn't just break wallets. It breaks the illusion that the system ever cared about keeping us afloat. Story 93. A full economic collapse. People will be homeless and on the streets. Crime will skyrocket. I'm convinced this is what Donald wants. To declare an emergency and stay in power. He wants chaos. It will happen unless there are drastic changes away from the Republican Party across all levels of government. Otherwise, the economy will collapse entirely. They only care about getting as much money as quickly as possible and do not care about the long-term impact on the American people. Story 94. According to the talking heads on television, if you are poor, it is because you are not working hard enough. Everyone in America should be able to live a great life. Story 95. Then the United States will ditch the dollar and will be forced to use Trump bucks and cryptocurrency. Story 96. I hope enough citizens begin to understand that a group of know-nothings is running this country and taking instructions from oligarchs and religious radicals, and that they will come to their senses and vote those responsible out. Story 97. I have a follow-up question. In the Middle Ages, what happened to the nobles when the peasants started to go hungry? Story 98. I think you are confusing inflation with a decline in purchasing power. During inflation, both wages and prices rise. When purchasing power declines, eventually prices fall and a recession ensues. Story 99. In the United States during the 1970s, a confluence of events led to inflation and high prices. The embargo by the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries caused oil and gasoline shortages, rationing, and high costs, which in turn raised the price of many goods. The end of United States involvement in Vietnam significantly reduced military-industrial complex spending and its contributions to the United States economy. Interest rates rose, farmers could not repay loans, and many farms were lost. This led to massive layoffs in the farm equipment and implement manufacturing industries. Ronald Reagan inherited a severe economic problem when he was elected president. Story 100, Look outside. We are there already and have been for a while. Story 101, Hyperinflation and a foreign power buys you out, and then tyrannizes you until you vote in a socialist dictator who socializes everyone and throws anyone who disagrees into gulags. We already have social media, so we're getting closer. Edit. Another post that goes from +7 to -7. A small bus of socialists must have stopped by Reddit at this hour. Story 102, Guillotines. People began building them. Not a threat, mind you, just a historical fact. Story 103, the government shouldn't fucking allow it. For Pete's sake. Story 104, the Federal Reserve will start raising interest rates, which will reduce the amount of money people and businesses have to spend and cause prices to fall again. Story 105. They will loan you money, and you will become their slaves. When you cannot pay rent and become homeless, they will send you to jail. Now they can force you to work on a farm to pick vegetables instead of other workers. Story 106. Here's an honest question. When something like this happens, money denominations do not suddenly change. It is not like you simply add an extra zero to a $10 bill and call it good. What happens to paychecks and hourly wages? Are those immediately adjusted to match higher inflation? For example, if someone earned $10 per hour, would the new pay have to be $200 per hour to cover hyperinflation? What about money already in the bank? If someone has $1,000 saved, that amount would not be automatically increased, would it? Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.